Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the chilling stories behind real-life crimes. Today we dive into the shocking tale of a woman murdered after discovering her husband's dark secret. Sophie Harper lived what seemed like a dream life. She was married to Jeff, a successful investment banker, and they resided in an idyllic suburban neighborhood. Their home was a picture-perfect blend of charm and comfort, filled with memories of vacations, family gatherings, and milestones that symbolized their years together. Sophie, a skilled graphic designer with a warm smile and a compassionate heart, was admired by her friends and coworkers. She loved her life and her husband, despite his demanding job that often kept him away from home for long hours and frequent work trips. From the outside, everything seemed ideal, and Sophie worked hard to maintain that image. However, over time, subtle cracks began to show in their seemingly perfect life. Jeff, once attentive and thoughtful, had become increasingly distant. His late-night phone calls, vague explanations for extended absences, and reluctance to discuss his work raised questions Sophie couldn't entirely dismiss. While she tried to brush off her concerns, convincing herself it was merely stress from his high-pressure career, an inexplicable unease began to settle in the back of her mind. Sophie found herself replaying small moments in her head, trying to piece together patterns in Jeff's behavior that didn't add up. She recalled the evenings he would rush to end conversations as soon as his phone buzzed or the way his mood shifted when certain questions were asked. She told herself it was nothing, that she was being overly paranoid. After all, they had built a life together, and she trusted him. Still, the doubts lingered, gnawing at her peace of mind. One afternoon, as Sophie was tidying up their shared home office, she came across a locked drawer in Jeff's desk she'd never noticed before. Curiosity got the better of her. After searching through the desk for a spare key without success, she decided to pry it open carefully. Inside, she found an unassuming folder, tucked away beneath a pile of outdated documents. Her heart raced as she opened it. The folder contained several IDs, each with Jeff's face but under different names. Sophie stared at them in disbelief, flipping through each card, hoping there was some logical explanation. But the pit in her stomach told her otherwise. These weren't mistakes or fabrications, they were deliberate deceptions. She felt the world shift around her as questions flooded her mind. Who was Jeff, really? And what else was he hiding? For the first time, Sophie allowed herself to fully confront the possibility that her husband wasn't the man she thought he was. The sense of safety and familiarity she had built her life around was suddenly gone, replaced by an ominous uncertainty that would change everything. Sophie's unease turned into determination as she realized she could no longer ignore the signs that something was deeply wrong. Jeff was away on one of his frequent business trips, and the discovery of the IDs haunted her. Each face was undeniably Jeff's, but the names and details were different. It was as if she had uncovered fragments of lives she didn't recognize, pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed. Determined to uncover the truth, Sophie decided to investigate further. She began by scouring their home, searching for any documents, receipts, or items that could provide clues. Her search yielded more than she anticipated. She found bank statements she'd never seen before, linked to accounts in unfamiliar names, and credit card transactions for expensive hotel stays in cities Jeff claimed he'd never visited. The evidence was undeniable. Jeff was living a life she knew nothing about. Late that night, Sophie couldn't sleep. Sitting at her desk, she opened her laptop and began piecing together the information she had found. She searched through social media platforms, looking for connections tied to the names she had seen on the IDs and bank statements. Hours of digging finally led her to a shocking discovery: Jeff had another family. She stared at the screen in disbelief, her heart sinking as she scrolled through photos of a woman and a young child. They appeared happy, posing in front of a modest home in a distant city. The woman's profile listed her as married to a man whose name Sophie didn't recognize, but the face in the photos was unmistakably Jeff's. Sophie felt a mix of heartbreak and fury as she tried to process what she was seeing. Her husband wasn't just lying to her, he was leading an entirely separate life. Sophie realized she couldn't do this alone. She decided to hire a private investigator to dig deeper into Jeff's activities. The investigator's findings only added to her growing horror. Not only was Jeff living a double life, but he was also using his alternate identity to commit financial crimes. Large sums of money had been funneled out of their shared accounts into offshore accounts under his aliases. As Sophie absorbed the revelations, strange things began happening. She noticed an unfamiliar car parked near their house on multiple occasions. She started receiving anonymous phone calls, and when she answered, the line was silent. It felt as though someone was watching her, aware of her every move. Despite her growing fear, Sophie knew she couldn't stop. She was determined to uncover the full truth about Jeff, no matter the cost. Little did she know, the cost would be far greater than she could ever imagine. The private investigator unearthed details that were far more alarming than Sophie had anticipated. Jeff was not only leading a double life but was also a wanted man under multiple aliases. Sophie learned he had been involved in elaborate financial schemes, defrauding individuals and businesses across several states. He had drained their shared savings, funneling the money into hidden accounts she had no knowledge of. What Sophie initially thought was a betrayal on a personal level turned out to be part of a much larger, more sinister pattern. The investigator stressed the urgency of the situation. Jeff's schemes were not only illegal but dangerous, and Sophie was now in a precarious position. She was advised to leave immediately, secure her finances, and contact the authorities before confronting him. But Sophie couldn't bring herself to walk away just yet. The thought of Jeff deceiving her for years filled her with a mix of anger and heartbreak. She wanted answers and felt a need to confront him face to face. As the days passed, Sophie became increasingly paranoid. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. On more than one occasion, she noticed the same unfamiliar car parked near her house. Its presence became so frequent that she began jotting down its license plate number. Late at night, she received calls from unknown numbers, and every time she answered, there was only silence on the other end. It felt as though her movements were being tracked, as though someone knew what she had discovered. Then came the text message. Sophie's phone buzzed late one evening, and when she glanced at the screen, her heart stopped. The message was from an unknown number and read, "Stop now, or you'll regret it." Panic set in as she realized that her investigation had not gone unnoticed. Someone, perhaps Jeff, or someone working with him, knew she was digging into his secrets. The message was both a warning and a threat, and it made Sophie question how much danger she was truly in. Despite the mounting fear, Sophie refused to back down. She felt that walking away without exposing Jeff would be letting him win, allowing him to continue his deceitful and criminal life unchecked. She decided she would confront him when he returned from his trip. But she also planned to take the evidence to the police, determined to hold him accountable for everything he had done. Sophie couldn't have known that her decision to push forward would seal her fate. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous her position became. With every passing day, she was getting closer to the truth and closer to a perilous confrontation she might not survive. When Jeff returned from his latest trip, Sophie was ready to confront him. The days leading up to his arrival had been filled with a mix of dread and determination. She had spent hours organizing the evidence she'd uncovered: IDs, bank records, photos of his secret family, and proof of his financial crimes. It was all laid out in front of her like pieces of a twisted puzzle, one she could no longer ignore. Jeff walked into the house late that evening, his demeanor casual as if nothing was amiss. But Sophie's heart raced as she faced him in the living room, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. She revealed what she had found, showing him the IDs and the financial documents. At first, Jeff feigned ignorance, dismissing her accusations with half-hearted excuses. But as she pressed on, laying out all the evidence, his facade began to crack. Sophie watched as Jeff's charm and composure gave way to something colder and more calculating. He stopped denying the accusations and instead shifted to a manipulative plea. He claimed he had no choice, that everything he'd done was to protect them both, and that she couldn't possibly understand the pressure he was under. But Sophie didn't waver. She told him she planned to take everything she had uncovered to the authorities, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Jeff's expression darkened, and a chilling silence filled the room. For a moment, Sophie thought he might lash out, but instead he turned and walked away without another word, retreating to his study and slamming the door behind him. Sophie felt a wave of relief, thinking the confrontation was over for the night. She planned to leave the house early the next morning, taking all the evidence to the police before Jeff had a chance to stop her. However, her relief was short-lived. Later that night, Sophie heard noises outside her bedroom window. Peeking through the blinds, she spotted the same unfamiliar car that had been parked near her house for weeks. The headlights were off, but she could make out the silhouette of someone sitting inside. Her unease grew as she realized she might not be safe in her own home. Determined to follow through with her plan, Sophie prepared to leave at dawn. But she never made it to the police station. Hours later, her abandoned car was discovered on a desolate rural road, the driver's side door ajar and her belongings scattered inside. Sophie herself was found hours after that, her lifeless body buried in a shallow grave nearby. The confrontation had not ended when Jeff walked away. In the shadows of their home, he had begun plotting his final, desperate act to silence her forever. For Sophie, the cost of uncovering the truth had been her life. Jeff initially portrayed the role of a grieving husband, carefully constructing an image of heartbreak and confusion after Sophie's sudden disappearance. He contacted the police, claiming she had gone missing on her way to a meeting, and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. To the outside world, Jeff appeared devastated, a man who had lost his wife under mysterious and tragic circumstances. Neighbors and friends rallied around him, offering support and sympathy, unaware of the dark secrets he was hiding. However, Sophie's private investigator wasted no time. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, he went to the authorities and shared everything she had uncovered before her death. Investigators quickly began to piece together the story. They found inconsistencies in Jeff's timeline and behavior, as well as the threatening text message Sophie had received just days before her murder. The evidence mounted when detectives obtained a warrant to search Jeff's home. Hidden in his study, they discovered the folder Sophie had unearthed, containing his multiple IDs and fraudulent financial documents. They also found traces of dirt on his shoes and in his car that matched the soil near the shallow grave where Sophie's body had been discovered. But the most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Records revealed that Jeff had contacted a known hitman just days before Sophie's death. While Jeff had initially intended to outsource the crime, his desperation led him to commit the murder himself when the hitman backed out at the last minute. Confronted with this evidence, the hitman confessed to his involvement in Jeff's plans, providing chilling details of how Jeff had plotted to eliminate Sophie to protect his secrets. During the trial, the full extent of Jeff's double life and criminal activities was laid bare. Prosecutors presented evidence of his financial crimes, his hidden family, and the intricate network of lies he had maintained for years. Witnesses testified about his increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to Sophie's death, painting a picture of a man whose carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. Jeff's attempts to maintain his innocence fell apart under the weight of the evidence. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before finding him guilty of first-degree murder, as well as multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never be able to deceive or harm anyone again. Sophie's death sent shockwaves through her community, leaving those who knew her devastated and struggling to comprehend the depth of Jeff's betrayal. Her courage in uncovering the truth, even at great personal risk, became her lasting legacy. While justice was served, the tragic cost of exposing Jeff's lies would never be forgotten.